So what about physical movements? Does the Quran dictate for us that we are supposed to perform physical movements such as ruku' and sujood, the bowing and the prostration during the salah sessions? First of all, there is no doubt that physical movements do exist in other religions, and they have their own variation of what they consider as bowing and prostration. Nonetheless, what we care about is what does the Quran teach us. Let's start with the term ruku'. And keep in mind that again, this idea of the ritual salah does not exist within the Quranic text. Ruku', according to Lisan al-Arab, has a physical as well as a metaphorical meaning. The physical meaning is to bend or to bow, whereas the absolute meaning or the metaphorical meaning is to be humble. And interestingly, we can find both of these definitions within the Quranic text. The physical meaning can be found in Surah 38, verse 24. And David, kharra raki'an. He fell down kneeling. Of course, there are some people who say that kharra raki'an doesn't necessarily refer to a physical falling, and I ultimately agree with that. But for the sake of argument, let's say that this is the case. We can see the absolute meaning of ruku', which is to be humble, throughout the other verses in the Quran, like in Surah 5, verse 55. The ones who uphold the salah and bring forth the zakah, وَهُمْ رَاكِعُونَ, while they are in humility. Obviously, 555 cannot be applied to a physical bowing. You cannot be physically bowing while upholding the ritual salah or paying the zakah. So raki'un here, without a doubt, indicates that there is humility. And this is what I want to get at. As far as the Quran is concerned, ruku' has a primary meaning as well as a secondary meaning. The primary meaning is to be humble, whereas the secondary meaning is to physically bend. And this is why in my other video about salah, I said that the secondary meaning, if you choose to do physical movements, that is really a personal preference. It is not what the Quran is dictating. What the Quran is dictating for us is to be humble. This is the ultimate meaning of ruku'. So I would render ruku' as something that we are to be humble. And I propose Surah 77 verse 48. When they are told irka'u, they do not yarka'un. Does this mean to be humble, or does this mean to be physical, or does it mean to be both? And interestingly, even in traditional Islam, they will tell you that if you bow and you prostrate without truly bowing and prostrating with your heart, then you have not bowed and prostrated. So again, I contend that ruku', the primary meaning in the Quran, is to be humble, whereas the secondary meaning is to bend physically. Of course, the same could be said about the word sujood. According to Lisan al-Arab, the word sujood has a physical meaning as well as an absolute meaning. The physical meaning is to physically prostrate, whereas the absolute meaning is to submit in obedience. And again, we can find both of these definitions in the Quran. Like in Surah 17, verse 107, those who have been given the knowledge before it, when it is recited to them, they fall to their chins prostrating. يَخِرُّونَ لِلْأَذْقَانِ سُجَّدًا. And again, a lot of people will say يَخِرُّونَ لِلْأَذْقَانِ سُجَّدًا does not mean a physical prostration, and I personally agree with that. But again, for the sake of argument, let us say it is a physical prostration. We can find the absolute meaning of sujood in other verses of the Quran, like in Surah 2, verse 58, where it says, enter this town and eat from it as you wish bountifully, and enter the gate sujjadan, submitting. Obviously, they are not entering the gate while their faces are to the ground, but they are entering the gate submitting in obedience. So again, the Quran teaches us the word sujud has a primary and a secondary meaning. The primary meaning is to submit in obedience, whereas the secondary meaning is to prostrate physically. And this is how we can understand the word sujud in the Quran. Now, allow me to delve a little deeper into the concept of sujud because it is a hot topic for many people. As noted earlier, sajada from the root means to submit in obedience and or to physically prostrate. What I'm going to do is propose some verses for you, and we can reflect on whether the sujud in these verses refer to submission and obedience and or physical prostration. Let's start with Surah 13, verse 15. It says, "And to God sajada, all those who are in the heavens and the earth, willingly and unwillingly, as do their shadows in the morning and the evening." Is the sujud mentioned here, is it referring to a physical prostration? Are the heavens and the earth physically prostrating to God willingly and unwillingly? Or are they submitting in obedience to God willingly and unwillingly? Another verse is 96:19. It says, "No, do not obey him and sajada and come near." Here God is telling the Prophet, do not obey him and sajada and come near. Is the sajada here is to submit in obedience, or is it to physically prostrate? We go to another verse, Surah 12, verse 4. "When Joseph said to his father, 'My father, I have seen 11 planets, the sun and the moon. I saw them for me, sajada.'" Are the sun and the moon and the planets prostrating before Joseph, or are they submitting to him in obedience? Surah 84. What is the matter with them that they do not believe? And when the Quran is read over them, they do not sajada. When the Quran is read over them, are they expected to physically prostrate, or are they expected to submit in obedience? When the Quran is being read over anyone, are they expected to prostrate, or are they expected to submit in obedience? Then we go to Surah 26, the last verse. "The one who sees you when you stand and your movements within those who sajada." Are these folks, are they supposed to be physically prostrating, or are they submitting in obedience? And again, these are just a handful of verses that we can reflect on and to test whether God cares more about sujud being in reference to submission in obedience, or is it referring to physical prostration, or perhaps both? With all this being said, allow me to address a very commonly quoted verse by traditionalists who claim that the sujud is exclusively a physical prostration. This verse is Surah 4, verse 102. The verse reads, "And if you are with them and you upheld for them the salah, then let a group from among them stand with you, and let them bring their weapons. And when they have sajadu, then they are to be behind you. And let another group come that has not made salah, and let them do salah with you, and let them be wary, and let them bring their weapons with them." Here, this situation, this scenario is referring specifically to a war situation, how to uphold the salah sessions during a war situation. And the problem here is that if we are to apply this particular verse in the standard of a ritual salah, we're going to encounter some problems. So let's begin by walking through this verse again. It says, "And if you," the you here is singular. It is addressing specifically the prophet or the leader of the group. "If you are with them and you upheld for them the salah, then let a group from among them stand with you, and let them bring their weapons." Okay? Then it says, "And when they have sajadu, then they are to be behind you." You here is plural in Arabic. So it's saying you all. Now the question again is, if we are talking about the standard ritual setup, then we're going to have some problems. Because in a traditional ritual salah, the leader of the group is also prostrating. He prostrates and everyone else behind him prostrates as well. And so in the first part of this verse, it's addressing the prophet, the leader of the group. Then it says, when they have sajadu, then they are to be behind you all. So technically speaking, if we are talking about the traditional ritual salah, this you should still be singular because they are prostrating behind the prophet, right? So it should be behind you, Muhammad, or you, the leader of the group. But this is not the case because this has shifted. It says you all. Moreover, reading this phrase here, it says, when they have sajadu. So in the first part, it's addressing the Prophet. Then it says, when they have sajadu. This means that they have sajadu does not include, the sujood does not include the Prophet or the leader of the group. It says they have sajadu. If the Prophet was supposed to prostrate with them, then it should have said sajadtum. And when you guys have sajadtum, when you all have done the prostration, then the other group is to be behind you, that is to protect you. And so again, linguistically, if we are following this scenario in a traditional ritual sense, then it really does not make sense. Something is absolutely missing. Instead, in the next slide, I'm going to share with you what I understand of this particular verse. So allow me to address how I understand this particular verse. Once again, the Salah sessions involves that the leader of the group and or the Prophet is actually facing the group because he is preaching the Quranic revelations to them. So this would be the scenario that we are visualizing. And when we read this particular verse in its appropriate context, we need to note a few things. This is specifically during war. It is a military type of briefing that involves the Salah sessions, and it is ultimately comprised of preaching the Quranic revelations to the soldiers. And the idea behind this verse is to simply provide some type of rotational protection. And keep in mind, of course, this visual perspective is a crude scenario. Now, let's walk through this verse again and allow me to demonstrate for you how this scenario applies here far more logically than the other scenario that we saw. The verse reads, and if you are with them and you upheld for them the salah, so the Prophet or the leader is upholding the salah for them, then let a group from among them stand with you and let them bring their weapons. This means, as the leader of the group is preaching the Quranic revelation, a group needs to stand with him to provide protection. And this is what we're going to see now. So there's a specific group that is going to stand with the Prophet to provide protection, and they're all facing this way. Then it says, and when they have sajadu, then they are to be behind you all. So as the Prophet is preaching the Quranic revelations to the soldiers, when this group have sajadu, i.e. they have submitted to the said laws, then they are to be behind you all. They are to stand behind you all. That is, they also are to provide protection in the other direction. Likewise, another group would come and he would preach the Quranic revelations, and when they have submitted, then they are to be behind you all. As we can see, this scenario makes far more sense than the traditional ritual salah that we know of. So to conclude about the physical movements in the Quran, we learn from the Quran that it does not provide a structured method for any movements. The words qiyam, ruku', and sujood are both used physically and metaphorically in the Quran. However, we must adhere to the absolute meanings of qiyam and ruku' and sujood, whereas the secondary meanings are actually optional. This means that ruku' has a primary meaning and a secondary meaning. The primary meaning is to be humble. The secondary meaning is to bow down. Whereas sujood, its primary meaning is to submit to the said laws, and the secondary meaning is to physically prostrate. And I would contend, based off of what we have seen from the Quran, that that we are to adhere to the absolute meanings, the primary meanings of qiyam, ruku', and sujood, whereas the secondary meanings are ultimately optional. That is why I mentioned in my previous video about salah that the secondary meanings, the physical movements, are ultimately a personal preference.